welcome for the third session, final session of our Bose Blitz series on large enrollment classes. Today, our topic will be focusing on considerations for assessments in large enrollment courses. My name is Lorelei Anselmo, and I'm a learning and instructional design specialist with the Taylor Institute. I specialize in blended and online learning. And I'd like to invite the guest speakers to please introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Annette. I'm a senior instructor in the Department of Sociology, and I teach primarily high enrollment introductory classes in our department.
Hi everyone, my name is Kara Seelock. I teach in the Faculty of Nursing, and I've primarily taught large classes since I started teaching with the faculty in 2011. And I primarily teach pathophysiology, assessment, nursing interventions, pharmacology. So I teach the bulk of all the undergraduate nursing students.
Hi, I'm Nazario. I'm also an instructor from the Department of Sociology. And I also have taught a number of large classes, not all of them classes, because I also work a little bit in the collaborative program with Red Deer College, and that is smallest. But yeah, I have also taught quite a lot of long classes here when teaching at the UFC.
Well, thank you, all of you. We have a breadth and width of experience joining us today, so I look forward to the session. For the land acknowledgement, I took this picture last month when I was out early one morning walking my dog. And as I was looking into the landscape, I kind of wondered to myself, what is the story of the land today? What is the land trying to tell me? And I looked at the fog and how it was gently covering and protecting the Bow River. I saw the branches of the tips of the trees, and it reminded me of like little kids who reached their arms up for their parents to hold them. And I thought the trees were kind of reaching up to that little bit of sun that was trying to poke through the clouds. And it occurred to me that perhaps the land story that day for me was one of protection and self-care. And so now every time when I walk along this land, the Treaty 7 land, I always try to think of what is the land trying to tell me about itself and about its peoples. And I encourage you to do the same next time you're out walking on this beautiful land that we share with others before us. So the panel for today will be similar to the other two sessions, where we have three distinguished guests, 3 questions for each of the guests, and each guest will have 3 to 4 minutes to speak at the question. As we mentioned earlier, if you have questions for the guests after each particular questions, please feel free to use the chat. And then we'll also have some time available towards the end of the session for open questions as well. So the first question for our speakers, and I'm just going to put the order of the speakers in the chat, Kara, Annette, and then Nazario. What are some considerations that you have when designing assessments for large enrollment courses?
Hi, since my name's first, I'll go first. So I've given this question quite a little bit of thought over the years, and as well for this presentation. 2 things I always consider when I'm starting creating and designing the assessments is I automatically think of the students and I think of the instructors. So the students and myself, essentially. I really start thinking, regardless whether it's a large class or a small class, what do I want students to know by the end of this class, by the end of this term? And then carefully plan my lectures and assignments around what the end product looks like. And then I go backwards. And so I do this every single term, even though I have taught the same course several times. I tweak it every single year. It is not the same course every single year, and it is not the same assignments every single year as well, because each cohort of nursing students that I teach brings a different element of challenge at times. And so I really structure my assignments around what's happening in the global context and what do I want students to know by the end. So students, number 1. Number 2, instructors. I always have to consider how many students do I actually have. I teach students anywhere from 120, and I've had as high as 150 per class, and I have typically 2 classes. So that's relatively 300 plus students, and I've had as high as 350 when I first started. So I have to really balance the number of students that I have with the context of what I want them to learn and globally what I want them, or at the end of what I want them to come out of the course with. And then I also have to consider how much time do I have and how much GAT support do I have when I'm creating my assignments. Because I'm not going to create an assignment that's a heavy workload for me on top of already managing at minimum 275 to 300 students and emails and faculty meetings and other responsibilities that I also have as a faculty member. I'm trying to be very succinct, Lorelei, so let me know.
I appreciate that, Kara. Thank you. Annette?
Yeah, I really want to build on what Kara said here, because just to give you a little bit of context, in the type of teaching that I do, primarily in our department, we have classes. For me, high enrollment is anywhere between 200 and 400, and we have very minimal TA support for that. So that's I have to start with that, because I also teach 3 to 4 courses every semester. So I have to be realistic about the time I can spend grading. Because especially when you teach multiple large enrollment classes, there's a lot of administrative work that needs to happen. And so we have to take that in consideration. So for me, the biggest challenge really was to come to terms with my pedagogical ambitions and the administrative realities under which I work. And so I'm trying to find a good balance here where the workload is realistic, because students don't benefit from not receiving immediate feedback either. So if it takes me 3 to 4 weeks to return an assignment and then there's no follow-up to that, the feedback that I provide is pretty pointless. So I really have to consider, how do I provide timely feedback and how do they have opportunity to improve afterwards? So for me, that means, unfortunately, for the high enrollment classes, that all the assessments are pretty much standardized. So that means creating effective multiple choice exams that are consistent with the learning objectives, however, as Kara pointed out. And so that requires thinking about writing multiple choice questions that actually test understanding and application of material, more so than just memorization. So I don't really believe in just asking for context or concept definitions that they can look up in a textbook. I don't think that's the point, but really encourage them through the assessments to apply what they have learned in the course. So one thing that I have learned is that, especially with the high enrollment courses, especially now that we're online, one thing that I have to do is provide much more guidance to students as to how to organize the work. So for example, in my introduction to sociology class, I've been tinkering around with different options. And finally this semester landed, or last semester I should say, landed on a way to make sure that they're moving through the material on a regular pace, which means that we're having a quiz every 2 weeks. So that ensures that they are doing the reading, that they're watching the lectures, and that they're not falling too far behind in the material. But it also ensures that they have multiple opportunities to earn their grade throughout the semester, and it's not hinging on a large assignment. So I think for me, that's very important. And then even though all of the assignments are standardized, because I have very, very limited TA support, I do work with Top Hat, for example, so to create discussions between students, pull them on different things, and allow them to apply course material through the Top Hat exercises or on D2L discussion boards to at least get them somewhat engaged with the rest of the class, exchange ideas, have a bit of a discussion. And Top Hat has some features where you can actually respond to other people's entries and such. And while the uptake is not necessarily great from students, it creates some form of engagement for them. And in the 300 level classes, where the class size is a little bit smaller, so we're talking about 250 students or so here, one of the things that I do is try to incorporate at least some written assignments so that they have some opportunity for reflection and application of the course material. So what I do is I provide a number of questions, reflective questions each week, and then students pick 3 weeks throughout the semester where they respond to those questions. So they have a little bit of flexibility. So in the past, what happens is that everybody leaves it to the last 3 weeks. So what I've implemented since is that there's 3 sections to the course and they have to write 1 response per section, so that they're not leaving it to the very end and then get overwhelmed with the number of responses that they have to write. And so because it's only 3 out of 12 or whatever, reflections that they have to write. They have some flexibility. It doesn't strain the TA because they don't have to do the grading every week, and the grading kind of distributes nicely throughout the semester. Because in terms of grading, very similar to Kara, I also think about the strain it puts on my time. And I also want to consider the TA's time all the same, because I don't think it's fair to ask the TA to do things I wouldn't do myself. And so this writing allows them to at least voice their perspective and to apply the material to their own lives and think through the material on a different level than just the multiple choice exams. So these reflective exercises in 300 level classes, top hat that allows the intro level classes to participate, as well as multiple choice exams, are primarily the assessments that I use, given the administrative context of my classes.
Thank you very much, Annette. Nazario?
Yeah, hi. So I think one word that also I wrote in my very new notes is like the word balance. I think balance is very important, and I think this is something that we all have to talk about, like the balance between what you do and the time you have, etc. So oftentimes you want to get carried away, right, and do a lot, and then it's just too much. So that is something that I also have to learn. I really, when I taught in Mexico, for example, I hate multiple choice. I really never like it. So when I came here, I tried to do just essays and assignments, and it was an insane amount of work, like way too much. So now I try to do like a more balanced things with multiple choice, written essays, etc. So I thought like when you have considerations for the assignments, you have to think in synergy terms. It's not just planning one assignment, but planning all of them, how they are going to work for the class and how each complement each other. Because again, you just have multiple choice, and well, that is not fair for some students, and then having so it's like a balancing act, and also for your own time, right? And something that also happens, and the importance of the TA was also mentioned, right? This term, I thought, well, it was 360 students kind of, but I said to leave my assignments as when I have TAs, but I didn't have TAs, and that was a very bad choice. I finished grading last week. So it was insane, like the essays and stuff like that. So again, time also very important for assignments, etc. I think is to leave time for feedback. I think it's very important for like not just put like just the grade, right? Because it's if you are going to plan these things, you have to plan also accounting for giving some significant a little feedback that you give them, as Annette was saying, because otherwise it's just like 5, 3, 2 or something like that. I guess that will not be very useful, and again is more time consuming. Also something that I have come also when having considerations, etc., is the sort of balance, also again using the word, between teamwork and individual work. Also that is tricky when it comes to large enrollment courses, because of course when we do teamwork is less work, right? But again, you don't want just to have like someone that is not working, because that is something that I have find again and again, and that is a very common problem that we have. Like you leave a final essay, and you know that then you get mails like, oh, most of my teammates did not anything, and I did all of that, or some people just ride the wave of teamwork. So that is also tricky to sort of which ones should be individual, which ones should be a teamwork, and deal with negotiate with the students, because they hate teamwork most of the time, many of them. So it's like how you convince them that this should be teamwork. Yes, I oftentimes get a lot of push, like for example, final essays, that people want to do them individually. So that is again like this idea of, should I allow them? Should I not include that? What I settle is like, I allow those that ask me for individual works, but I don't make that open, like it's not in the outline that they can do it individually. So that reduces those things. But again, it's always hard to find mechanisms to sort of control those that are not going to work, which again, it is something that I find very, very, very important for those considerations. And as Annette was saying, also like it's very important also for me to have flexibility in my assignments. So that is something that I find is essential for large course enrollments, like how my assignments are very much open in terms, for example, of the topics that they choose. For example, one that I like a lot is in racialization is they go to a museum, and then they go to the museum to sort of see the construction of identity, for example, in Canada or in Calgary, etc. But I allow them to go to any museum they want, so, or any exposition. So that allows them sort of be implicated in the process, but at the same time, well, something that is their standard. And yeah, it's oftentimes also like try and test a lot of things. Like, again, as I was saying, some classes I have are smaller. So something that I really like when I was teaching like a smaller class was presentations, online presentations of topics. And then I have the great idea of doing that online for 150 students, and it was like hellish. And it took me like, I don't know how, it took me like a week of just doing presentations. And it was like, oh my God, I need to be careful with. So it's very oftentimes hard how much time they're going to say, because you say, oh, this 3 minutes of each presentation, then downloading them, playing them, etc., etc. So also we have to be very careful again with efficiency and time, etc.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all three of you, not just mentioning the considerations that you're dealing with, but also the challenges, and that each of you framed your discussion within the instructor and the student perspective, like both of the workloads. Yet despite those considerations and challenges, all three of you offer flexibility to your students. And I think that's really wonderful. And I think it really helps with keeping the students engaged during the course. So the next question, and the order of speakers this time will be please Annette, Nazario, and Kara, is what does an effective assessment look like for those large enrollment courses that you teach?
I would say, like, I'm going to talk about a specific example. That's the reflection journals that students write for sociology of gender. So that's anywhere between 150 and 250 students usually. And so usually I give them reflective questions that ask them to look at the course context in the context of their own lives and start with their own personal experiences and then analyze that experience applying the course material. And so that really helps them to understand themselves in social context and understand how their own choices are shaped by that context, but also it allows them to connect to the course material a little bit more closely. And I find that the student feedback is fairly consistent on that they really appreciate it because it really brings it home for them. But in order to make the assessment effective itself, again, I think structure while also giving flexibility is important. And in this case, very clear assignment guidelines and a very clear rubric that I provide so that when they submit their assignments on D2L, we can use the rubric for grading, which helps really to cut back on the feedback. But at the same time, the rubric itself is not self-explanatory, I've learned. So students don't look at the rubric and necessarily understand what the difference is between excellent application of course material and good application of course material. So that's usually where additional qualitative feedback is often required. And so we give students a selection of questions that they can respond to. We'll try to make it as broad as possible so that everybody can locate their experiences within those questions. And then they're free for themselves to kind of structure their assignment. So they have to take some control over the product. So we're not telling them to the very last minute what to do or what to answer or how to answer it, but they have to think for themselves how to approach answering that question and what material to use to support their arguments. And by having the rubric, they know exactly what's expected of them. So when they write the assignment, they know exactly what to include, what to focus on. So I point out that the analysis is worth twice the point. So they should really be short on the description of their experience and really focus their energy on the analysis of that experience. And then the TA provides them with some feedback. And based on the feedback, they can then move on to the next assignment and incorporate and try to do it differently next time. So there's room for improvement based on the feedback. And I found that's really important, kind of the scaffolding, providing feedback and giving opportunity to try a different approach after receiving feedback to incorporate that into the learning process. So for me, that's one of the assignments that I would really hate to let go. So I'm hoping that I can secure always just enough TA support to make that grading happening, because I think it's a very integral part of these the 300 level courses is that reflection piece.
Thank you, Annette. Nazario?
Yeah, so when I was when let me see. Yeah, so I went, yeah, like this idea of also like engaging the students is, I think, is very important. How can you engage them in the assessments, as I was saying, something that they see themselves in the assignment, or they can somehow bring some of their interest to the assignments, etc. As I was discussing, part of the flexibility with my assignment of the museums. Or I also like, for example, like analyzing movies and stuff like that in terms of ethnicity and racialization that allows them to be engaged because they are things that they like, and so they enjoy those things. And again, how you keep them in those things, sort of allowing those things. Also, as I was saying, it's very important to be, I found like large classes require like extra clarity in the outlines. I often surprised in how they misinterpret things that I thought were very easy to understand. So I have a lot of care of everything is there, like like the amount of letters they should have in the essays and 1.2 and all the little things, because oftentimes either like by mistakes or because they have bad practices of making 14 all everything or something like that is like something that doesn't make sense. So it's very important to be very clear to everybody and sort of talk about that in class. I find myself talking about, for example, outlines quite a lot, especially when they are actually going to start to do them. So yeah, nothing is too basic for them. For me also, as I was saying, really the holistic approach is very important to do. I won't say that an assessment can be effective by itself, but it is really something that you have to take into account all the things that you are doing in the class to notice what is exactly effective or not, right? Because, for example, I have one of my assignments is a comic strip. This is the first one I do, but by itself, it will be something very easy. So I have to work with all the other things to properly, so because I like to include creative elements a lot also. Like I feel like engaging the students is oftentimes asking them to be a little creative. For example, the comic strip is in the first two weeks they draw about a topic of the class. So for example, like how is race or ethnicity, etc., etc. And thinking about in images allows them to sort of think in a different way. But of course, it's more like a opening assessment, and then they go to harder analysis. So as you know, also in sociology, writing is very important. So I also try them to practice their writing, because if they don't write well in sociology, that is really bad, right? And some of them are not good at that. So I try to make them practice through, again, analysis, critical thinking, all those sort of things that we have. We try to put those things. And Annette was mentioning, again, the rubric oftentimes for them does not mean anything. So what I do is, for example, in the rubric, I oftentimes, especially in the essay, write in little comments of things that they got wrong. Like, for example, like your references, you did notice hanging indents and something like that. But again, if that is extra time, and it was very crazy without the TA, because it was just me creating and creating. But yeah, so those little comments that they are useful for their written practice, etc., is something that I do there. Yeah, for me, effective assessments have to do with critical thinking also, of course, in the case of ethnicity, racialization, media, etc. They challenge their ideas and learn how to do. I don't like when they are very commonsensical in what they write. So I make them know that, for example, I repeat them so much to them that race is not a real thing, it is a construct. So when someone uses that at the end of the course, it's just like a lot of points taken, because like I have been saying this a lot, stuff like that. So yeah, that is what I would say.
That's great. Thank you so much. Kara?
So once again, creating an effective assessment, I consider my 2 points again, students and instructor. So with students, I tend to think of exactly where they are in our program. I come from a faculty that has an integrative curriculum, meaning everything that we teach within our program is kind of webbed and weaved and threaded throughout, and that we are all connected. All of our courses must have some connection to one another. So we have to be very cognizant of what the students have previously learned and what they will learn after us. So I'm very, very cognizant when I'm creating my assessments of that point in particular, that I'm bringing in material from the previous terms. I teach a content heavy course. So my assessments are typically multiple choice exams, specifically NCLEX related multiple choice exams. And then I have a few assessment strategies on top of that, such as an assignment. And then I also have practice questions that are non-punitive and that are participation marks. My multiple choice exams are scaffolded in difficulty related to Bloom's taxonomy. So I want students to learn material, foundational material that builds and builds and builds up to the end. And then again, in the term after me, continues to build and build and build. So I have to be very specific and very intentional with the questions that I ask and how I'm building that knowledge, as well as how I'm teaching it. I'm very cognizant of how many cognitive domains I can touch on, especially for each learner in the class. I can't overwhelm students with synthesis of material. I have to have a blend of both, some regurgitative, which makes students feel like I'm kind of understanding the material, as well as a mix of comprehension and application, like Annette was talking about in the first question. Students have to feel confident in what they're learning, and especially in a content-heavy course, material that's very sciencey based. I have to build confidence and not destroy confidence as well with those assignments and assessment strategies, which can be a bit tricky because with a large class, I know I'm not going to meet all the students' needs at the exact same time, which can be incredibly vulnerable for me as a teacher, because those specific constructs that I may teach at a specific point in the course, which again is very intentional, I may have a student that might not meet that until 3/4 of the way in the term, but then all of a sudden everything clicks. So it's a balance of those assessments too, that I'm also not creating heavy assessments in my course when they're already going to be heavy assessments in another course. So we balance our course, our assessment strategies with the courses that are being taught in that term. We have that luxury in nursing to be able to do that. So if I know another course has a lot more papers, I may offload that in that week with a non-punitive assessment, that they learn how to write specific questions, or they learn a new way to think about a concept, so that we balance their cognitive load and not exhaust them with an already exhausting content heavy term. So that's how I look at an effective assessment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate, again, all of your contributions. And I love that it's like very structured, talking about rubrics and assignments and providing good feedback. And then kind of the conversation went into clarity and being clear and being able to understand your students and what they're capable of and what their cognitive load is, and being considerate even with effective assessments of where the students are at in the semester. So I really appreciate those connections. And of course, balance has come up again as well, right? So balance when you're considering your assessments, and balance of what an effective assessment is. So the last question, and the order for this question will be Nazario, Kara, and then Annette. So now we're going to move from the actual design of the assessments to practices. So what are some effective practices when designing assessments that are equitable and inclusive? So you've got so many students. How do you try to make your assessments so that they can reach as many students as possible in a fair and equitable manner? We'll start with Nazario, please.
Well, I found this to be the hardest question, I think, of the three, because of course there's a lot of conversations about this going on, and not only in Equitable, but the colonizing and all those sort of things. And again, you start in a moment with these large classes that is hard to pay attention to all the students that need to have attention and really do these things sort of different. The first thing that I start is, again, offering, as I was saying, different types of assignments, so everybody sort of can have some of them that are good at. For example, I have find some international students or students that are not proficient in English. Some of them do very well in multiple choice, and that is when I start to like more multiple choice, right? Because some students that struggle with writing essays, well, do well with multiple choice. And again, integrate some creative things. Again, teamwork, and sometimes I feel students do not understand that, can help them to fix holes that they may have, like issues that, again, of writing, or they can collaborate and do something stronger all together. If someone really is a good writer, someone goes to essays. So really, that is something that I think can make things equitable, like you are prepare well, your team works, right? That way, well, it can be inclusive and again, they can work together. Of course, it can be also with their own issues with that, right? Because some students are sort of overachievers, but also overachievers that do not think in the social reality of their peers. So they just want to do those things without really understanding that other students struggle with racialization or gender, etc., etc. I have issues with that. And again, something I also try to do is work also closely with the student accessibility. I was think that is very important when it comes to inclusive, etc. Like giving some students extra time, and again, all those sort of things in terms of quizzes and in terms of again assignments, etc., or answering sort of their mails. It is oftentimes hard to say what is. I think what is really hard. What is inclusive or what is not inclusive in terms of, is this assignment inclusive or is not inclusive, right? Like but general thing again is practice and sort of testing this assignment and saying, oh, everybody's doing well in it, everybody can sort of perform well in this, or this is perhaps something that I should take because it affects this group of people, right? And I think also when it comes to being something that is inclusive, it's very important to give students their voices, right? Not be so structured that you don't allow them to bring their own realities. That's also something that I try to do when I ask them message, etc. That if they deviate a little bit, but it's something that is very important for them, subjugated knowledge, something like that. Well, they can bring a sort of those things. Again, silencing is such a problem in education. So again, giving their voices, helping them to sort of integrate with a class, understand, etc., is something very, very, very useful. And again, as I was saying, balance and holistic. So you have a proper evaluation, not just on one, not focus on one thing. I think that is the worst thing you can do. Just focus in one type of assignment, because then you start being inclusive instantly, right? Because you're just like going to favor someone instead of someone else. Again, as I was saying, not focusing in writing, for example. Yeah, and also, well, if you have not, I want to show this book. I find this book very useful, like Sociology of Education in Canada. It's a pretty good book for like seeing issues with education, etc., with university, that allows you to sort of think about how can they. But it's I think still we are working in this, but yeah, I would say those things.
Thank you very much. And if you wouldn't mind, Azario, typing in the title of that book in the chat, I think that we really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, next we have Kara, please.
I find in nursing, especially in large classes, trying to create a space for equity, diversity, and inclusion can be a bit challenging at times. And sometimes some things you try don't always work. I tried putting students into groups on Zoom, and they hated it. They actually didn't want to work together. They didn't want to teach one another. I thought, oh, that may have been a good idea, but it didn't work. I try to create assignments and assessments and have discussions in class that include multiple perspectives, but I teach a very sciencey course that is very designed to be about medical issues, heart attacks, heart failures. And so there is some generalizability based on the conditions that we talk about to meet multiple populations. I think another way that when I'm designing my assessments, is to maintain multiple voices, as Nazario had mentioned, so that those multiple perspectives and multiple contexts can come into an assessment where students can see patient clinical situations of multiple people, multiple places, multiple populations. And I think when I'm creating assessments and assignments as well, I have to be very cognizant of time for the students. So those students who require extra accommodations, I may have to be more flexible in how I approach my assessments. For example, I give students practice questions, and they're usually timed. You might have 15 minutes to do these practice questions. Some students who require accommodations have difficulties doing that. So I'm very flexible with those students, and we have those discussions. However, in nursing practice, there are certain actions that are timed, like when you give medications. And so I try to create assessments that students will see in real-time clinical situations so that students in a theory class can actually learn to accommodate their own learning needs in respect to what a patient may need. So I try to mirror real world scenarios as much as I possibly can in a theory course for equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Kara. Annette?
So this one, I'm always struggling a bit because this is kind of work in progress, I would say. And as you know, certain awareness is raised, and even for me, as my own learning continues, I'm becoming more aware. And I was really fortunate that I had students who helped me learn to some extent, even though it's not technically their job. But it's usually in those situations that I'm realizing that some of my practices are really problematic. So for example, when we started with online exams, I would give students the extra time, those who had accommodations, and then the break time I would set up as grace periods so that they could exceed the time if they needed by their indicated break time. And it turns out, however, and I only learned that like a year later, that the grace period doesn't show up for the students. So they did not actually see the break time reflected in their exam time. And so they were really struggling with that because they didn't see the break time, and then they get stressed out. So I find accommodations, I think Clockwork is really great that we have switched to an online system where we as instructors can access accommodation letters. It takes the pressure off the students that they have to come and approach me, especially before or after the lecture, in front of the entire class. So I think that's a system that I hope that we will maintain because it makes it very easy for me to access those letters, and it takes the pressure off the students a bit. And I think it's a good idea to reach out to students to just assure them that you're working with them throughout the semester. If they need anything, they just need to let you know, because some of them are really shy around those kind of things. And I think it's good for me to reach out first and to make clear that they will be accommodated. Just like Kara, I'm using practice quizzes, for example, to introduce students to question formats, the timing, and just what D2L is going to look like in terms of the assessments. And I also provide, and again, this is built on something Kara said earlier, provide resources, because I cannot assume that everybody has the same skills coming into the class. So I provide a short kind of guide video on how do you watch the lectures, how do you do the readings, how do you approach the assessments for this course? Because if I test them on lecture, then I need to first kind of show them how to approach the lectures and how to process the lecture material. And I cannot assume that everybody will be on the same page, especially with the large introductory courses where everybody comes from so many different disciplinary backgrounds and such, and everybody is in very different spaces in terms of their skill development. So I think that's really important, to provide the resources for students to be successful. Again, one of the things that I find is helpful is have a larger number of assessments that are not weighted as heavily. And I typically increase the weight of the exams throughout the semester. So we're starting with like a small 10% quiz. And then once everybody gets the hang of the quiz format and the timing and those kind of things, then the weight starts to increase gradually, which also reflects kind of the complexity of the questions, where towards the end, even though exams are not cumulative, the knowledge builds on previous information that we provided. And so the thoughts become more complex. And so that's why I increase the weight of the exams, because the difficulty increases throughout the semester, because the complexity of the material increases as well. And to be honest, with the shift to the online exams, one of the things I'm really debating is that even if we're moving back to in-person instruction, I keep the exams online. Because one of the things that really occurs to me is how stressful facilitating exams were in person, especially for a 400 student class. We have a classroom with 400 seats. Typically the class period is 50 minutes. You have 10 minutes break. So you have to wait for the room to clear. Then you have to move in. You have to set up the entire exam. Everybody has to sit down. Everybody has to settle in. And then students start writing, everybody finishes at different times. So there's a lot of commotion starting 20 minutes in, people getting up, leaving. And I found for some students that atmosphere was really stressful, because the timing is stressful, the commotion and the noise. the energy in the room. And so I'm even thinking about maybe trying to keep exams online. Speaking of online exams, one thing that I found really important, especially for large classes, as Nazaria was saying, to be very clear. Here is the number of questions you get. Here are the different types of questions that you will get. So you will have 2 fill in the blanks, 2 multi-select questions, 2 matching questions, and 15 multiple choice questions. And here's the order in which one of you get the question. Some students were really nervous about this mixing of question function in D2L. And then if there was like short written answers and long written answers and some multiple choice, they never knew in which order those questions would come. So they wouldn't know how to allocate their time during the exam because they didn't know, okay, is this the short or the long answer question? How much time should I be spending on this question? So giving them some guidance as to how long each of these questions types should take can really help them to manage their time during the exam much better, I think. And the other thing that's really important is, especially in online exams, is to let them know exactly what kind of materials they can and cannot use for completing those exams. So even though I called it open book exam, and I just assumed that everybody knew what that meant, until during the exam, I started getting questions from students like, what exactly does open book actually mean? Like, what exactly can I use and what is actually off limits? So now in the quiz instructions, I provide them with a clear breakdown of what materials they can use for the exam and what they cannot use. And then one thing that I find really important, because I cannot go with every student over every exam, especially online, it's very easy to have them review their own exams. And so I let them review the questions that they do not answer correctly. And I have typically an explanation as to which one was the best answer and why. So that they have a little bit of feedback, even though I'm not physically there and I'm not physically going with them over the exam. I was a little bit worried about people copying the exam and putting it online and that kind of stuff. And I just had to let that fear go because protecting the integrity of the exam, the reality is I can't. And the reality is when I had in-person exams, I had people walk out with the exam out of the exam room. So, I mean, at the end of the day, for me, there is always a chance that somebody will use that material in ways they're not supposed to. I have very clear guidelines in my course outline, and I go after students when I do see stuff online. And I'm cautious, and I say, just as a reminder, as per course outline, there was a policy that you cannot actually share this on third-party websites. So if you want to put it up here, it's fine, but then set your settings to private so that this is not universally available to everyone. Those kind of things and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, integrity in exams, that's always been a challenge, I think, and we can certainly talk about that more. We have a little bit of time left. So, yeah, I figure if they take the exam, they can take screenshots of it while they're taking the exam, so they might as well just look at it. And I found it has really cut down on confrontational office hour visits where students come and say, it's impossible that I got this grade. And then you go over with them and you explain to them why they got the grade they got. So now it's kind of self-explanatory. So I have less of these really angry office hour visits where people come in and are really confrontational right off the hop. Most now come to just talk about the material. So yeah, and as Ali was saying, there are some ways to guarantee integrity of exams, and reminding students that integrity is important is one thing, but realistically, a lot of students that I teach in intro, for example, are taking it as an option and they want an easy end of story. They want a GPA booster and they will do anything to get that GPA booster. But I find using questions that test their understanding and synthesis more so than using, questions that they can easily look up in the textbook helps to cut that down a bit. I haven't really seen a huge inflation. Interesting, what I noticed is that I have fewer students failing the exam. And so I think I see mostly change at the very lower end of the grade distribution rather than at the upper end.
Thank you so much. And talk about amazing practical strategies. So I thank you all for sharing them. Between flexibility of assessments, giving students voices, multiple perspectives, as Kara mentioned, and then all of the strategies that Annette concluded with, including beginning the tests with those instructions. I think that's really, really important as well. And that does lean into academic integrity. There is a question in the chat that I just wanted to highlight if anyone wanted to take the question. It's from Brianne. If there is an online exam or quiz during in-person semester, does it need to be asynchronous? So what have your experiences been with your online exams? Have you offered them asynchronously or synchronously?
I've done both. So the first fall that we were online, we were given some instruction that we needed to allow lots of time for students to take an exam. And so I would open an exam for like 24 hours. And I would have students emailing me with a problem with D2L at like 10:30 and 11 o'clock at night. And I was exhausted. I had to be pretty much on call for those students when it was asynchronous. So I was like, nope, not going to do that again. And I made my exams synchronous. So whenever the class time was, that's when the exam was. I had an hour and a half for each class. I made sure I gave the time per the number of questions I asked and the difficulty of questions that I asked, because it was easier on me. Oh my goodness, to be available to students all the time when they need you for a large class of 300 plus students is too much. Like, we're already, I think, overextended in our time. And we already give a lot to our students that I had to create some extra boundaries this term, and it worked much better.
Yeah, just to give one example, I don't do those 24-hour frames anymore. I actually extended it beyond that. But in the first semester, I did the 24-hour windows. I think we had the final exam that was scheduled by the registrar for like 8 o'clock in the morning. It had to be finished by 8 o'clock in the morning. And that's really tricky because a lot of students do it last minute. So my recommendation is always, if there is an endpoint, put the endpoint somewhere midday. For that reason exactly, because the bulk of the students will do it very last minute. So be available during the end time of the quiz mostly for troubleshooting. So I had a student who emailed me at like 4 o'clock in the morning with problems in the quiz. I got up at 6. I addressed it right away. I said, I reset your quiz. You can start over. And then that student never responded back because they went to bed. And so they never finished the final exam because we're like in kind of, it was a bit of a standoff. So that was a good experience for me. Most students expect the quizzes to end at midnight for some reason. And so for me, that's difficult because I don't want to sit in front of the computer around midnight to troubleshoot possibly something the last hour before the quizzes do. So I absolutely dislike that. But what I have tried last semester is instead of setting an exam time, I say, okay, I'm publishing module 1 and 2 on Monday, and then you have 2 weeks to watch the material, and you have to do the quiz by the end of the 2 weeks. So you can take the quiz at any time within those 2 weeks, but that's the absolute last point. And the vast majority of students will do it the hour before it's due, even though they have 2 weeks technically to do it. And I don't release the grades right away. So they do the quiz, they don't get feedback right away. I release it after the quiz deadline. So even so sharing answers and stuff is a little bit more difficult because they don't know how well they actually did on the exam. And again, I didn't see that this hugely increased the grades or inflated the grades in any way. And so that gives them a flexibility to plan their own time within that 2 week time frame and do the quiz when they're ready. But once they start the quiz, they have to finish it. But it's also very generously timed. So I think I give them like 2 hours for a 40-50 question quiz, something like that. So it's very generously timed. And I found that it really cut down on the number of emails with technical difficulties, people stressing out, people forgetting about the quiz and those kind of things. So in the end, it made it easier on me as well. And since grade inflation is not a huge concern for me to begin with, it actually worked out quite well that way.
Thank you, Annette. I see another question in the chat. When it comes to equity and inclusivity in assessment, knowing the needs of students matter, how does one identify the needs of students in large enrollment classes?
Yeah, that's a very big challenge. Right? I guess also it has to be also like a student, and we cannot be expected to be the ones to just be finding the issues with students, right? Because like, we cannot see the people and just say, oh, you have an issue. So what you have to do is you present you're very accessible, right? Like it's like just let me know you have an issues. I just always write in my outline, like if you have issues with any assignment or problems, just write to me and I will be there for you or help you, or as long as it's some justified thing. So just to be open, and then, well, they will contact you, because there is no way to just tell someone that is struggling, right? It is very hard. And in my experience, they do reach to you. I have, especially in the pandemic, I have so many emails about issues and problems and stuff like that. And so, and I think there is also like, just as with a good movie, sort of, what is this term, like students tell to each other, like they talk to each other. So if you're accessible and they know you like respond well, and you're not like aggressive when they ask you, they will tell others, and then they feel confident and they write to you. Like there is this boss of well, this professor listens or cares or whatever. And that is how I in my experience do that. Some students are hard to reach, and perhaps we are not reaching, but I think that is the only way, or really like I saw like also perhaps putting like a survey, like, but it's hard to put a survey like, are you struggling or something? So it's more like a, just be certain that you talk to me, or I can help you, etc. Just present you like that. I think it's the only sort of way in those classes.
Yeah, I definitely rely on students and their goodwill. Like I present myself in the introduction videos and such as someone who can be approached and we can talk about things sort of situation. I found like last semester, there were a few students that missed like quiz deadlines, mostly after I released the grades. Then they're all of a sudden sending me this long story as to why they couldn't do the quiz right at that point. And I found I always build in a little bit of a buffer. So if the quiz is due on Monday, I tell them that they get the results by Friday, just so I have those extra 4 or 5 days to let students who missed the quiz deadline still do the quiz, because at the end of the day, it's nothing to me to just let them do it. I usually, there's reason they missed a quiz, and usually they don't do super great on the deferral either. But I think online or facilitating deferred exams online is fairly easy. Thankfully, it's not quite as complicated as it was in person. And that being said, you really have to communicate and position yourself as someone who's willing to work with students and accommodate them. I had one student who was going through multiple barriers to learning last semester, and it took a lot. Like, it was a lot of work. I'm not going to deny that. I think that's actually for me the biggest barrier to identifying students who need supports, because A, I'm not always qualified to support them, and B, the amount of time a single student can take through accommodation and another chance and really kind of staying motivated and supportive in those situations can be very challenging, especially when we feel already very overwhelmed with our own work. And I find it's really important to not make assumptions, not impose, in the beginning, I would reach out to students who are not doing well on quizzes and stuff, but at the same time, I'm not doing that anymore, because in some ways it's really quite patronizing as well. And I try to kind of find a good balance to accept that they're adults, and if they need support, they need to reach out, while also acknowledging that for some, the reaching out part is really intimidating.
I also think that there's a difference when you have large classes online versus large classes in person. And I think there's a different relationship building that you implement with your classes. And it's really hard to replicate in person with online teaching. I'm a person behind a screen. They don't know who I really am. And I think that kind of impedes learning in a bit. And I actually look forward to the day when we can all be back in a large theory class, and you can make a joke and not know if you actually made a joke and students laughed, or if anybody heard you, or you don't know. And out of large classes, only a handful may turn on cameras, which makes it again very difficult to have that relationship building. So with large classes, I don't know about others, I would have students come up to me for an hour maybe after class, because they had a problem in clinical, or they had a problem with an understanding of the material. So it's very difficult to create that same kind of relationship building approach online when you have 200 cameras off and there's 200 blank screens. So it's different. So I think you have to be kind to yourself that you won't do it all. That's certainly what I've learned.
Tara, what a wonderful way to end the session. Be kind to yourselves. Thank you so much, each of you, for that. I really appreciate that, because I I just can't even imagine teaching those large classes that you're doing, and you're doing it with such compassion and care for the students. So I do hope that you take your time for yourselves as well. I am cognizant of the time. If anyone else has any questions, please go ahead and take the time right now. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for participating, and a huge, huge thank you to Kara, Annette, and Nazario for dedicating their time and sharing their expertise with us today. Thank you.